Hello, everyone in Religion and Warfare. This is our March 23rd Monday update. This is the part where I talk to you about what's going to be due for next week, so you have an idea about the readings and videos going in. So the first part of this response paper is focusing on the Boxer Uprising. So there's a PDF on the, just gives you some historical background on the uprising, and also discusses the relationship between race and religion in the uprising, which I think is very important. And if you're not familiar with the Boxer Uprising, it occurs in China. And I think it's interesting to kind of look at, we look a little bit at Japanese religion, and then we've looked at some of the ancient polytheistic religions. But for the most part, after that, we dealt with monotheistic religions. And now we're going to see a kind of point of contact when you have a monotheistic religion meet a polytheistic religion, and where both are kind of connected to different understandings of what it is to be civilized and national identity. And I think it raises some interesting and complex questions. The next video is on the next part is a video, the Boxer Rebellion Part 1 video, that talks a little bit more about this interaction between Chinese and American Christian missionaries in particular. And it focuses on this family, the Prices. And I think it's interesting. It gives you a sense of the individual people who were involved in these things. Following that video, there's two readings. One is entitled Mass Spirit Possession, and the other is Magic and Female Pollution. I think those readings are really, really interesting, and are, which is, of course, why I would assign them. I don't want to assign you something that's boring. They show a very kind of different perspective, again, than what we've been kind of dealing with. And I think that's useful. But one thing I want to stress, focus a lot on those questions. There's a couple areas where I don't ask a lot of questions because the author goes into some interesting comparisons with other parts of the world, but I'm not interested in focusing on that for this assignment. So for now, just really focus on those questions and make sure you answer them. And please note that I've got the page numbers to kind of help with that. And when you think of when you read the Magic and Female Pollution one, you may recall earlier when I talked about Joan of Arc, I said, I emphasized the whole thing where they were trying to figure out if she was a virgin or not. And I said, this sounds kind of weird to go into, but we're going to talk about it more later, and you'll see some interesting comparisons. This is the part that I was referring to, this Magic and Female Pollution part. Following that, there is the Boxer Rebellion Part 2 video, which kind of talks about how the Boxer Uprising, Boxer Rebellion ends. And I think it's kind of good to kind of finish up the story in a sense there, though that's a story that in many ways is still alive. The book where those articles or chapters are from, Mass Spirit Possession and Magic and Female Pollution, that book is called History in Three Keys, and it's looking back at how the Boxers have been remembered throughout history. Not simply and they've been understood in very different ways. They had been criticized in the past, and they were viewed as heroes when the communists took over, and I think they're kind of in between now. It's very complex. So one thing I should tell you that's a little bit different about the rest of this video, this is only the second time I've taught this class, and when you're a professor trying to develop classes, usually you change them each time you teach them, at least the first few times, because you're trying to get them, where you feel it was just right. So because of that, I made some changes. I was hoping to do more with this kind of anti-colonial warfare one, and I was hoping to do more with this kind of issue of how secular ideas are used to justify war. And I ended up not doing that just simply because we're kind of low on time. So I decided to make this to give you a little bit more time to prepare for the atomic bomb discussion. So what happens is, even though we've got a whole week on the atomic bomb and videos on that, I thought I should give you some kind of background information. So in order to understand the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we need to kind of understand how war began in the Pacific. We naturally, because we live in the United States, we tend to focus a lot more on Europe, but it's important to note that World War II, in a sense, really begins in Asia, particularly in 1937 with the invasion of China, and that's why there's this video on the invasion of China. And one thing I want to stress, I'm not trying to justify the use of the atomic bomb. I'm trying to keep my own opinion back and let you all talk about it, and then later I'll talk more about what I think and why. But the one thing people who believe that the use of the atomic bomb is justified, they will point out that Japan committed a lot of atrocities, and therefore it was important to defeat the Japanese so they would not be able to continue to carry out such atrocities. And I think, I'm not sure how much I agree with that, but I think it is a fair point to say, look, if you're going to talk about the atomic bombs, you can't just start talking in 1945. You got to go back. So in this video, The Invasion of China, we look about how Japan was acting in China, or Japanese soldiers were acting in China. The next video we look at is the Pearl Harbor. And it's important to kind of understand, how did Japan come to attack the United States, and how did Japanese people respond? This is one thing that I would critique as a historian, is that oftentimes people look back and kind of, especially in Japanese history, and say, the Japanese people were kind of held hostage by the military, and it wasn't their fault that any of these things happened. And I think that's overly simplistic, because as we'll see in this video, many Japanese welcomed the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And the Japanese critique of the atomic bombing tends to start in 1945 and kind of ignore that, Japan did engage in a lot of aggression. And in a sense, if you're, and this does happen, it's not covered so much in that video previously, Japan did engage in the aerial bombardment of civilians in China. And if you're going to criticize the United States for using atomic bombs and engaging in aerial bombardment in Japan, which I think you can do, you also have to acknowledge what Japan was doing. Japan did it too. They didn't have the technology. It wasn't as devastating. But we do need to kind of think about that, look at that. The next video kind of fast forwards to 1945, so we can understand the historical context in which Americans and Japanese were making decisions that would lead to the atomic bomb. And this is one thing that we have to understand with history. The decision to drop the atomic bombs is shaped by earlier decisions that people made, even without knowing that they would affect the atomic bombs, even decisions people's made with that they made without knowing that the atomic bombs even existed. So it's very important to understand what the Americans, what the Japanese were trying to do in 1945, just before the bombs are dropped. Another issue that I think is important to consider, people focus on the atomic bomb sometimes without thinking about just the basic idea of bombing. Right. So the idea of strategic bombing, of trying to drop bombs in areas where civilians might be hit. And there was this big argument about whether you could purposely target civilians or whether you could engage in precision bombing and try and hit factories and things like that, even without reference to the atomic bombs. And it's important to bring in that context. So I have a video clip on the American use of fire bombs, a kind of primitive form of napalm, against Japanese cities. And I think this is a very good video to watch. And in fact, one of the pilots who engages in this bombing use of fire bombs has a religious reflection. So I think it's highly appropriate for this class. The last two parts of this upcoming week's assignments are parts of the documentary White Light, Black Rain. And there's two parts. One's about 13 minutes long and the other's about 45 minutes long. So this is a little bit longer. Remember, because we're not meeting in person, I extended the amount of videos there were to kind of try and get something approximating class time. And one thing I want to stress, even though these clips are longer, if you look at the study guide, there's not actually that many questions on them. For these clips, I'm not asking as many specific questions because this isn't meant to help you understand so much how people came to make decisions. This is trying to help you understand the individual, what individuals experienced. So I don't have to be as specific, if that makes sense. I kind of just want you to sit back and watch this. Look at the questions first, but sit back and watch this and maybe take some notes and then answer the questions afterwards, right? I'm not asking you for as many details, even though these are actually quite long clips, because the point is that I want you to kind of experience this and see what these people. So in a sense, this is more about feeling than thinking. If that makes sense. You should still think, don't get me wrong, but I don't want you to be, kind of coldly objective when you're watching this. I do want you to experience, in a sense, the emotions of these people. The one thing I do want to point out where I do get specific is in 11C. So this is White Light, Black Rain, Part 2. There's this question about the Hiroshima Maidens Project. It's not actually a very long part, but that's where I get really specific because that's a part where religion really comes up. And I think it's very important. And I'll make a reference to it most likely later. But I just want to point out that for those videos, it is a little bit longer. That's so you want to give yourself plenty of time. And that's largely to make up for this class time that we're missing. But also, I think this is a good way just to give you an emotional sense about the atomic bomb, right? We have to think of as much as possible objectively, but human beings are not simply brains, right? We have emotions, we have hearts, and so on. So with all that being said, I wish you good luck with this upcoming week. Stay healthy.